Welcome back to the Political Podcast. Our last interview was with Tim Richardson from the Labour Party, and today we are joined by John Pesutto, the opposition leader, and Bridget Vallence, who is the member for Evelyn, I believe. Yes, so John and Bridget, thank you for joining us today. Just for the audience out there who may not know who you both are, could you give us a brief description of your role in Parliament and just a little bit brief discussion on who you are as people before we get started with questions?
Sure, look, I'll kick us off. I'm John Pesutto, the opposition leader. I'm also the member for Hawthorn. I've been the member for Hawthorn from 2014 to 2018, and then I was re-elected to that position in 2022 and became leader in December of last year, so nearly a year. So obviously as leader of the opposition, I work with Bridget and our other colleagues, including our National Party colleagues, to operate as a check and balance, if you like, on the Allen Labor government, but also to, over time, develop and announce our own vision for the state, which we are in the process of doing.
And Bridget?
Bridget Vallence, so the member for Evelyn, that is out in Lilydale, Moorbark and the Yarra Valley, so in the outer east of Melbourne. And it's an absolute privilege to represent my local community, but also be the Shadow Minister in John's team for a bunch of things: industry, innovation, manufacturing, tertiary education and skills and training, which are particularly important for our state as we're facing a number of challenges across our state in terms of skills and supporting businesses who have faced many tough times recently, but they're also our employers and contribute significantly to our state's economy and employ people, get people into jobs.
Great. I realise that we don't have much time, so we'll get straight into the questions. So, John, I have the first question for you. So, could you briefly talk to us about your childhood? Like us today, you didn't come from a flashy eastern suburb. How was life growing up in the Latrobe Valley?
Yeah, look, I was born as one of 5 kids. My parents came to Australia separately from Italy in the early 1960s, and I was born some years later, along with my 4 siblings. So, growing up in country Victoria, I have just the fondest memories of my childhood growing up with my brothers and sisters in our local community. I didn't grow up in a family that had political connections. My father worked in the power stations and mum worked as a machinist at a local shoe factory, so we didn't mix in those circles as a family, whether it was local government or state or federal government. So I only really discovered politics when I was in year 11 and year 12, where in each of those years I attended an excursion to Canberra. So that really fired my interest in politics, and from that moment on I was absolutely hooked. I'd started developing an interest by about 16, 17 years of age, and so I found my journey into politics as one that saw a lot of doors open. Even though I came from a fairly, what I'd call, it's probably an outdated term to some degree, but a working class background, I didn't find that there were great barriers. The great thing about the Liberal Party is it's about effort and what each of us as individuals can achieve, not just for ourselves but for our community. So my pathway's always been one that's welcomed and inspired me to reach heights.
Yeah, that's good, because for many of us as well, so we're from Point Cook, of course. I would say Point Cook and also the Latrobe Valley area is a very similar type of demographic, with a lot of working class people, especially people working in factories and that sort of thing. So I think that's something we do share as well, where we grew up. Yeah,
absolutely.
But they're aspirational people too.
Yeah.
They want to do well for their family, do well, be able to contribute, grow buy a house, get their kids into good schools, have good education, have a good job, and have a future. So I think aspirational people too. Jess?
The next question we have is for all 3 of you. It is, how was your high school and university life, and do you have any memorable moments?
You want to start, Jess?
Sure. I loved my time at school. I had a great school. I've still got a great group of friends from school, and then I went on to Monash Uni, studied arts law, and I thought that was a terrific environment because I got involved in student politics, like many of us did, and it was also a really great way to make friends. And I think the friends you make at university are often, and particularly through student politics, are forged in the trenches of high pressure, and they last a very, very long time. So I had a great time both at university and school, and I would highly recommend students make the most of their time at university to travel. I spent some time over in London doing an internship over there, and it was the best experience and to make sure that you also make the most of those wonderful university holidays that you never get in any other time again, to make the most of getting around, travelling overseas, but also Australia as well.
Yeah, I also really enjoyed, relished the opportunity to learn, and I loved school and university. You know, going through school, you know, our family, when I was very, very young, we had the recession, and my father was made redundant, and my brother finished TAFE but couldn't get work. And so that really shaped me in my high school years as I got older through high school, around the fact that politics actually and decisions of government actually impact people and families, and job opportunities, and you know, the concerns of everyday families, and our family experienced that. So I tuned in a lot to politics through high school, and got very interested in it. And by the time I got to Melbourne University to study commerce and arts, I chose also to get involved in student politics. And by that stage, I really determined what were my values. And my values, you know, I was very passionate about freedom of speech, and association, equality of opportunity, reward for effort, and backing small businesses. And I realised that for me, the Liberal Party and the Liberal, you know, it was Liberal values. So I got involved in the Liberal Club at university and got involved in student politics. At that stage, it was around, you know, the campaign that we ran heavily on was advocating for voluntary student unionism, because of course at that stage student unions, I've got nothing against unions existing and people wanting to join unions if they provide a good service, but I also don't think people should compulsorily be required to join one. And so we had that you know, very strong campaign, and I got very, very heavily involved and absolutely loved it. And as Jess said, the same for me. Many lifelong friendships are forged in the student political movement, for us the Liberal student movement, and some of us are all in Parliament today. But it just goes to show that, you know, if you have your values and you understand what your values are, and they underpin everything you do. So, you know, in University, obviously, out of that, doing a commerce degree, I got into business. I never thought I'd be in politics. I never thought I'd be a parliamentarian. I wanted to be in business, and I had a 16-year business career before then getting into Parliament. But yeah, it's very valuable, you know, use your time in university, and use all of the opportunities available to you.
Well, I just have the fondest memories of my secondary school education. I was pretty much a bit of a rascal for most of my time, so probably there were times where I spent more time in school detention than actually studying. But by about year 11, I realised, oh, I've got to get serious now, so I started studying quite hard. I wanted to, you know, do law commerce at Melbourne if I could. That's where I wanted to go, and so I just scraped in. I just got the marks. I was a small country school, St Paul's Catholic College back then. It's changed since, but it was a small school. We didn't really see many graduates of the school go to law school or, you know, do medicine or anything like that. It was usually you would sort of work your way into a trade locally. So having those aspirations was really fired by, you know, my parents' experience coming here and just seeing them work so hard. And you felt a kind of sense of obligation to make the most of the life they created for us. So I really threw myself into that. So I just scraped in, and yeah, university was great. I got involved in the Liberal Party, the senior party, fairly early on, and I was volunteering for a local member. Although I was living in Melbourne, I would go back and work for the local Liberal member, driving around the seat of what was then called Macmillan, doing things around the electorate that he needed. It was a marginal seat and was for a long time. So I learned a lot of the skills that you need to win tough electoral fights. Even back then, there were little things that you would do, and little things like, you know, saying hi to everybody on the street, you know, just shaking every hand, go and talk to everybody. Don't make assumptions about which way people are going to vote. Just treat everybody with respect and let them explain who they are and what their priorities are. So university was a chance for me to really just pursue what I was passionate about, like, you know, Bridget and Jess. So coming out of that, I ran for my first pre-selection within 1 year of leaving university, and whilst I didn't get there, I got close, but I was, you know, on the pathway from that time forward.
Great. Yeah, so I'm assuming many of you you've joined the Liberal Party probably via university and joined student politics. That's probably a very good pathway for a lot of politicians in Parliament. I'm assuming many of the other politicians here as well probably joined politics politics via university as well, and just discovering what they want to do and what their values are.
But you don't have to. I mean, I think we all agree. You don't have to join through university. We just happen to do that. But we've got some great members, and great members of Parliament from across the political divide who've come from all walks of life. It's really the kind of judgment and the wisdom you bring to your role, and the maturity that you bring to the roles. Academic qualifications help, but it's more that temperament that's the most important thing, I would argue.
Yeah, so we have now our third question. I think, George, you're going to be asking this
So
question.
it's for all of you. What made you all join the Liberal Party and run for the state parliament?
Well, as I said, as I described before, it was my family experience of falling on tough times during an economic recession. I was very, very young, and my brothers are much older than I. And, you know, as I said, Dad was made redundant, and my oldest brother, who was in TAFE, then came out of TAFE and couldn't get work, and ended up having to he actually went on to welfare and then was a labourer on a building site. But he'd done an accounting in TAFE and couldn't get work. And so that really shaped me and the conversations around home and the challenges that we were facing. And then that made me, as a young person, as I was getting older through high school, be really alive to all of these issues and how government decisions can influence people's everyday lives. And so, as I said, that made me think about it. You know, and I thought about all of the values and what's important to me. And so I found the Liberal Party represented my values the best in terms of freedom of association, freedom of speech, reward for effort, you know, supporting small business, which is the backbone of our economy. And that's where I decided that the Liberal Party reflected my views the most, and that's why I joined the Liberal Party, and I'm still very much passionate about those values. And they underpin each and all of the decisions that we, you know, all of the pieces of legislation that come into the Parliament, or the way that I look to serve my local community, are underpinned by all of those values each and every day.
Yeah, sure. So very similar to Bridget in terms of the values for why I decided to join the Liberal Party. I grew up in a household that my dad actually worked in politics. He was a state member of Parliament here in Victoria. So we talked a lot about politics around the table, and it was sort of a natural part of growing up. And when I got to university, I decided to join the Liberal Club there, and got really involved. And I think for the first time it was an ability to sort of have that contest of ideas with other people. And one of the great strengths, I think, of the Liberal Party is that not every person in the Liberal Party has the same viewpoint on everything. And it means we can have really constructive debates about issues. We come at things from different perspectives. And for that reason, we are able to bring a broader group of people together. And one of the things we all believe in is that individuals are best placed to make decisions about their own lives and their own families. And so how do we make sure that government plays a role in empowering people to do that, and empowering people to be entrepreneurs, and empowering free enterprise, and through that building a really, really strong community. And my time after university, I spent some time as an advisor to the federal government, which was really interesting to see things from a federal perspective. And then I went and worked for the Business Council of Australia, and really sort of headed up their response to sort of COVID and how business managed through COVID. And what struck me, like Bridget said, is how impactful government decisions can be on not only on people's lives, but people's livelihoods. And I thought that there was a real opportunity to change the way that we do things, be more consultative here in Victoria. So when the opportunity came to unexpectedly put up my hand for pre-selection, I gave it a go, and you sort of go into these things, you never know how it's going to result at the end of the day, but I think what we would all agree is you should give it a go and have no regrets. And through that process, you learn a lot about yourself. You're able to talk a lot about the different ideas and different issues when it comes to local issues in your own electorate, but of course more statewide issues as well, and get a really good understanding of what you believe in and what you want to achieve. And then to be able to bring that into the Parliament and actually fight for that every single day, I think is a huge privilege, and I would encourage so many young people to really think about that as a pathway.
Your question was about why join the Liberal Party, and they were, you know, in terms of my answer, I think Bridget as well, as they were why we joined the Liberal Party as young people, you know, when we were sort of 18 or so. However, I had personally had no aspiration to become a Member of Parliament. I am here now and I'm very passionate about it, but through as you work in business, and I've had children, and you see, there are other things that shape you through the time as well. So, for example, I've got had kids in the education system, and you think, well, how do we want to help shape the best possible outcomes for our children, get the best possible education? In the area that I represent, we've got a volunteer fire brigade. The government really didn't value our volunteers and the work that they do to protect our community through volunteerism and volunteering to keep our community safe in times of emergency. Yet as a Liberal, from a Liberal side, we value our volunteers and that volunteer spirit that's so crucial and epitomises the spirit of our outer suburban and country communities. And they're the kinds of things that our values underpin. So it's not just sort of through our university or politics, it's also things through life in terms of your business and your family and your kids and your communities, and that how a Liberal government or a Liberal vision would be able to address some of these challenges and value what matters most to people in our communities.
So certainly in my case, I've answered this question over many years, and I think after all this time I've simplified it to this really, which is that as Liberals we believe that the key to a prosperous state or a prosperous nation that is also civilised requires you to do as much as you can to enable people to pursue their aspirations, make the choices they want, be as enterprising as they can be, to help build what I call the wealth of the nation, the wealth of the state. And then there's a question about, well, how do we make sure that as a civilised people we can provide that opportunity for people, but also for those who suffer through no fault of their own, with a disability, or they've been someone who's grown up knowing only abuse, or for one reason or another. There are many different stories of disadvantage. How can we make sure that they are cared for and looked after as well? Because that is the mark of a civilised people as well. The difference between us then and Labor is that I think that what tends to happen under Labor governments or centre-left governments that see everything through the prism of their own power. And so what tends to happen over time is that the government becomes consumed with its own survival and what's good for the government. And through that, they might even mean well doing that. They might not even do that, I'd argue some do, but they might not even appreciate that it's all becoming about them and it becomes less about the people. And that's why I think as Liberals I look at us, and we're always about what do you need to be the best person or the best family you can be. And for those who can't, how can we help you to live a civilised life? But unless you're oriented in that way to look at that, it becomes all about you. So many of the arguments we have with the government here in this parliament are really, when you boil them down to get the real kernel of the dispute, it's about, we argue, what the government is doing is about the preservation and success of it politically as a government, and not about what people need or even want. And so when you ask me why I'm not Liberal, that's really what it comes down to. And it's a very important difference. People think the parties have converged on some things they do, but very different outlooks on life and the outlook of, I guess, the fundamental role of government.
I think an important thing that you brought up there was, the party is a very broad church. I think John Howard, former Prime Minister, talked a lot about how the party does represent a very big group in Australia. Parties in the UK and America, there's a very conservative parties, and Liberals don't normally always go with Conservatives there. While the Liberal Party here covers both Liberals and Conservatives. So I think that is really interesting about how the Liberal Party is really, really broad here compared to those centre-right parties in America and in the UK.
That's very true. And I think we pride ourselves on, I think you look at our party, it's very different personalities and outlooks. And we allow that. We actually cherish the fact that people have very different views.
But so too do communities.
Yeah.
We really seek to represent and reflect the community that we serve. And you have diverse views and different approaches by people, but you've got to try to, as John said, work with the community, and our objective is to listen to what people, what matters most to people, and try to give the best possible policy outcomes, and that will meet the majority of people's needs. But also making sure we look after those most vulnerable in our community.
Yeah. I think George, you have the next question, and this is specifically for John as well.
Yes, for John. John, it states on your Parliament site that you operate your own legal practice and corporate advisory firm, and before politics, you worked at many other legal firms. Could you talk about your experience while working as a lawyer and how prepared you for the politics?
Yes, well, as I said, I graduated from uni and went straight into the law, but really to run for political office. So I worked at a country firm. Look, I think it's really good, and I think all of us, the thing you'll find with all of us, is that we all had lives outside of politics. And I certainly have the view that you're better off in public life if you've done other things. So that's what I encourage all of our viewers to really think carefully about. You don't need to let politics consume you. You'll be a better politician in my view. I have no doubt about it. There should be better if you've done other things in life and you don't depend on having to get elected to have a professional career. That's the first thing. The other thing too is that being involved in politics, I would say this, is that it's almost like politics prepared me for my professional life, because a lot of the campaigning I did, things that I found myself using even at the most difficult times. So when I lost the seat of Hawthorn in 2018, I had to build a legal practice and I had no clients. What did politics teach me about that? Campaigning, you go out and win clients, you've got to go and talk to them. In the same way that you have to go and win support for a policy idea or to get yourself elected. So that was, it kind of worked almost the other way. But I have to be honest, I spent a lot of time in the law, public, private practice, small, large firms, regional, city. I'd always had the passion for public life at some point. So I enjoyed that work, but I always knew that I'd want to come back to politics in one way or another.
That's good. Yeah, so I realise that it's almost 11:25, so you're going to have to probably...
We'll wrap it up in a few minutes, but yeah, we'll keep going.
Yeah, so next question is actually for Bridget. So Bridget, you yourself used to work in the automotive industry as a procurement professional across the world. Could you tell the audience a little bit about your line of work and how it helped you become a politician you are today?
Yeah, well, procurement, for those of you who don't know what procurement is, it's in the most simplest terms, it's about purchasing or buying the goods and services that an organisation needs in order to do the work that it does. All of the inputs that go into a manufacturing process, so it's a commercial job. And I absolutely loved my time working in the automotive industry for starters, and manufacturing from starting with cars and then tyres. Tyres maybe aren't as interesting, but working, particularly in car manufacturing, that's making a product that people actually use, and it's so important for people's everyday lives, whether it's getting from A to B, or some people love identifying with their cars. It's a tangible product, and to contribute to that process. And we made cars not only in Australia, unfortunately no longer in Australia, but also I worked on cars that we made in Argentina, Thailand, India and other places. And I absolutely loved that time, but working in business, both in manufacturing, in retail, and in the procurement profession, I think it brings a lot of skills to, that I can offer. It was one of the prime reasons that I put my hand up to run for Parliament. Apart from the privilege of representing my local community, what I thought I could offer was my procurement expertise, because governments do a lot of spending, governments do a lot of procurement. So whether you're fixing a dangerous traffic intersection, upgrading a road, putting a shade sail in at a school, building a school building, building a hospital, building the Westgate Tunnel project, all of these are commercial procurement projects. You're running big tenders, you're engaging with contractors, you need to understand the scope of the work that you're trying to achieve, negotiate a good commercial outcome that delivers value for money for the Victorian taxpayer, and that's a skill that I thought I could offer as a parliamentarian, because I think, to the best of my knowledge, I'm the only parliamentarian in the Victorian Parliament that has actual procurement expertise, and yet the government does it all the time. When you pick up a government, each year the government hands down a budget, and it's all about spending, and that all occurs through procurement activity. So yeah, so my time in business and procurement, you know, as I said, I wanted a business career. I now have had a business career, and now have a career in politics as well. But that's because I think, yeah, that business expertise that is something that you can bring in, and because at the end of the day, I mean, everyone, whether you're just a household and you're going to do might maybe do some renovations to your home, or you're going to do the shopping each week, or you want to plan for a family holiday, these are all commercial decisions that households need to make. And at this point in time, with the cost of living crisis, households are having to tighten their belts, and government should do the same thing. But still, without cutting services, we need to be able to find ways that we can use the way that we spend our money, the expenditure process, the procurement process. There are always better ways to spend Victorian taxpayers' money through government, and that's where that sort of, I guess, business career that I've had, we can utilise when we're holding the government to account about how they're spending their money. Victorians' money.
I feel like that's a very good little interview to become treasurer. Yeah, so.
Might talk about
Very public.
Yeah, so we'll get now to the next question. This is for Jess.
Yep.
Do you have any plans to improve the education system? If so, what are they? What are your plans for the less fortunate to gain greater education?
This is a really good question. So I became the Shadow Education Minister probably about 2 months ago now, and sort of when I took that role on, I outlined sort of three key initial sort of focus areas that we as a coalition and opposition really want to focus in on. The first is student outcomes and learning outcomes, and we saw recently that nearly 1 in 3 Victorian students are not meeting NAPLAN standards, particularly in literacy and numeracy, and we just think that is simply unacceptable, that we've got nearly 1 in 3 students in Victoria not meeting those standards, and these are the foundational skills that you're going to need for employability down the track. And I know Bridget takes a keen interest in this in her portfolio areas about how we make sure that students are equipped for roles of the future, how we make sure that they're going into the right tertiary qualifications, and if you're not getting those foundational skills in the classroom, then you're not going to be able to progress down the track. And one part of that is the way we teach in our classrooms, and there's been a debate over recent years around the way we teach reading in particular. And we've got a view in the coalition that we should be looking at evidence-based learning and making sure that we're following what the evidence shows us to work and where we get outcomes in that space. And there's been a number of reports, particularly by La Trobe University in this space, and we've called on the government to implement those in our classrooms. So we're going to take a big focus on that. The second big issue in Victoria is around teacher shortages. I just spoke in the Parliament a few minutes ago about the fact that at the moment, today in fact, I had a look this morning, we've got over 2,500 vacancies for teachers, for principals, for learning support educators. And that means that there are classrooms in Victoria that don't have a maths teacher or an English teacher, particularly in regional Victoria. There are some schools that are on the precipice of actually not being able to remain open next year because they simply cannot find teachers. So not only do we need to retain, not only do we need to find new teachers and make sure that people want to come into the profession, but we actually need to retain our current workforce. And what we've seen is 1 in 5 graduate teachers leave the profession within 5 years. And that means a 20% attrition rate. We need to reverse that. We need to look at what is causing that. We actually need to invest in the professional development of our teachers so that they do feel like this is a vocation, a profession that they want to be in and that they're valued. And so that's something we're going to look at. And finally, the big issue for us is, and something that connects very closely to our Liberal values, is making sure there's always choice when it comes to education, and parents have choice. And we've seen, unfortunately, from the Labor government, an attack on choice when it comes to education. They've imposed a payroll tax on non-government schools. This is the only state in the country that looks to tax our schools, tax education, and that's hitting parents at a time that they can least afford it. It flows directly through to an increase in school fees. Parents have a right to choose where they send their kids to school. They have a right to send their kids to a school that reflects their values or their faith or their aspirations for their children, and to tax that is a tax on aspiration. And it also also makes it very difficult for many of these non-government schools to contribute more broadly into the community. Many non-government schools have bursary programs, very generous bursary programs to make sure that those who are the most disadvantaged in our community can access that education. They do a lot for not-for-profits and for supporting communities right around the world, and that puts at risk a lot of that work. So they're just some of the priorities we're going to look at over the next couple of years.
Yeah, especially focus on the teacher shortage as well. In our school specifically, I think Tobias can also speak, and this is where we've had a lot of teacher turnover. Your Viscom teacher?
My art teacher, 2 of them left, and we had one term the start of the year. She left in the first term, and then we had the second one leave just before the exams.
And so that's very disruptive for your learning. And this is part of the problem, is we are seeing teachers leave the profession. We need to understand what's driving that and make sure we're actually investing to keep teachers in the profession and in classrooms for the entire year so that your learning isn't disrupted.
Tobias, do you have the next question?
Yeah.
And this is for Bridget.
Yeah. How will you ensure that schools are prepared, are preparing children for jobs of the future? For example, with more advanced in technology jobs opportunities?
Yeah, so that's probably a little bit of Jess and me, and we'll work together. So we're both, we've got to sit down. It's only early days since that we've had purview of these portfolios, but ultimately, what we believe, and other liberal values, what we believe is that everyone has a chance to fulfil their potential. But we equally know that as a state, we want to make sure that as a state, Victoria is competitive. And some of those technological jobs, jobs in innovation, technology, advanced manufacturing, is really where Victoria needs to play, so that that's good for our economy, but it also provides that competitive advantage for Victoria. But in order for us to be competitive in these industries, we need to make sure that the young people coming from primary school, high school and into tertiary education are enabled to learn the skills that they need in order to take up these job opportunities locally here in Victoria. So, whether that's through programs, coding, all of these kinds of things, there are many opportunities that we think we can do better at in school, in high school particularly. There are some tech, they call tech schools, but really they're not, I don't think that they're delivering as best as they could, because they're not often integrated with the education system. They're sort of siloed off to one side. And so there might be opportunities that we'll explore how we could potentially integrate that better into the actual mainstream school environment, so that they can then transition into their tertiary education and to the jobs of the future, or of now and the future. But we've got a lot more work to do around how that best plays out. But there's definitely lots of opportunities, and there's lots of young people who want to get into some of those areas, like sports tech is a big. For those interested, France is having the Olympics in next year, I think it is, and what I'm hearing is there are many Victorian, Australian companies in the sports tech, so that's around the data, all the behind the scenes sort of IT, and in terms of the sports, that they're actually the Victorian and Australian companies that are supplying into the French Olympics. Overseas, they're going over to France and they're going to be doing all of that sports data and all of the different types of sports we have in the Olympics. That's very exciting, and we want to make sure, but that's also a great economic opportunity for those businesses, those Victorian businesses. So we want to make sure young people know about these opportunities, learn the right skills, and are supported in that way. So yeah, definitely lots of opportunity there for young people to have an educational and a job pathway.
Yeah, so we'll just move on now to the final question that we have. So finally, this is for all of you. What's one piece of advice you give to students in 2024, especially those who are entering university or high school? So if you want to start with John.
Advice in terms of politics or
just entering school.
Dream big, aim high, and if I hope all of our viewers have instant success when they've tried, but just keep going. I've learnt that in my journey, professionally and politically. You just have to keep going and enjoy the successes, but always keep striving for something more. Bridget?
Everyone is valued. Don't be too hard on yourself. Work hard, but don't be too hard on yourself, and know that you're valued.
I think best piece of advice I was ever given is make sure you just give it a go. As John said, you might not succeed every single time, but you will learn something about yourself and about the process and about how you can do something differently. So give it a go. If it doesn't work out, try again.
Alright, and that's all our questions.
Thank you very much.
John, Jess, and Bridget. I'd like to thank you for spending some time with us. I know John was supposed to have a meeting about 10 minutes ago. So we've gone a little over time, but thank you again for letting us come in and interview you guys.
Thank you so much.
Great.
All the best for
Thanks
your
a lot.
podcast.
Thank you.